All right, let's get started and happy to have more people join as we get going. Hi, everybody. I'm Tessa. I see a lot of familiar faces here. I'm the Land Use and Budget Director for the council member. I'm looking forward to a really great night tonight. Before we get started, let's launch the results of the poll so far. See who's here. Okay, awesome. Great. We have most people living here, which is super cool. A lot of people working here. Happy to have the people not living here that or working here that come visit, joining us tonight. That's awesome as well. And great to see that people are being active in our district. So let's look at uh, who participated so far in the process. Great. So this is awesome. So we have 60% almost of people are new to the process. So this is great. Hopefully you get a good sense of where we've been over the past few months and where we're going. And great. It looks like we have a bunch of people as well who have been active in some way or another in the process. So that's great. So a little bit of housekeeping to start off the agenda. We're going to start with some remarks from the council member. We'll turn it over to the council land use team for their brilliant presentation about the guidelines that came out of our visioning process. And then we'll turn it back to the council member to discuss some next steps. And then after that, we'll do a short Q&A. So if you have questions substantively as the report is being presented, please put them in the Q&A and we may be able to answer them with the time that we have. Otherwise, there's going to be opportunity for you to give feedback after the presentation, written, in which case we'll answer it in the upcoming week. Just yeah, quick housekeeping note: Q&A is the only way to communicate with us tonight. So yeah, I don't think I have anything else to start off with, so I'll turn it over to the council member.
All right. Thank you, Tessa. Hey, everybody. Councilmember Tiffany Cabán. My pronouns are she, her. I'm excited that y'all are here. Super humbled and grateful for everyone's participation this summer through whether it was like open houses, the survey, or if it's your first time here this evening, welcome. It's been super energizing to just be among neighbors who care so deeply about the future of our community. I've said this if this is your first time, I've said this at a lot of the open houses that it's been sort of difficult and frustrating to kind of deal with applications around development or housing on kind of an ad hoc, a lot at a time basis that really it doesn't start with community. It starts from, the owner or the developer on a particular parcel, and it doesn't really it's not designed in a way to really center not just the thing that they're trying to do on a space, but also everything around that makes life what it is here in our neighborhood and the things that we want for ourselves, our families, our neighbors on a day-to-day basis. And I had a lot of fun at the open houses, just seeing different neighbors coming at it from different perspectives, but then also finding, and you'll learn in the results this evening, that there's like a lot of common threads around what people love about Astoria and what they really want to see to make it even better. So I'm going to be using that as sort of my North Star going forward. And I also just want to extend gratitude to not just my team and a couple of folks on my team that are on here, but also the land use team. You're all going to see that they have done just an absolutely incredible job memorializing how space is used in the district and experienced in our district now. And they've made it so that I can distill, based on what all of you all have submitted to me, what priorities need to guide me when I'm thinking about land use for the remainder of my time in office. So I'm going to turn it over to them now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, council member. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here tonight. My name is Dana Leventhal. I am a borough planner with City Council's Planning and Land Use Division, and we have a couple more folks from our team that are here tonight who will also be presenting. So I want to give Brian and Sage a chance to introduce themselves as well.
Hello, Brian Paul, Deputy Director of Planning and Land Use Division. I've been at the council almost 12 years now. term limited out soon. And it's really exciting to work on this and to try to bring more proactive planning to the district and Queens in general. So I'm very happy to be here tonight. And we also have Sage Dumont from our division here.
Yeah, hi, my name is Sage Dumont. I am a community planner at the City Council's Planning and Land Use Division, and very excited to be presenting this work that we've been working so hard on.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's kick it off. Next slide, please. Okay, so today we'll be reporting back what we learned throughout this community visioning process for Council District 22 and presenting some community planning guidelines. The guidelines reflect the past 6 months of engagement with
I'm
residents.
sorry, heads up, I don't think we see the slide. Am I wrong on that, or?
You don't see the slide. Does anyone else? Tessa, can you see the slide?
I see the agenda slide.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
And maybe it's just me then. I don't see the slides. Okay, carry on.
Okay, hopefully that gets figured out, but let us know. So the guidelines reflect the past 6 months of engagement with residents, with community groups, and with local partners. So this is what we'll cover today. We'll start with an intro and the purpose of the report. Next, we'll walk through the engagement process, how we gathered data and feedback. We will summarize key findings from the existing conditions analysis and from the engagement. And after that, we'll share the community planning guidelines, which were developed based on the priorities that we heard from everyone throughout the past few months. And then finally, we will outline next steps. Okay, next slide. There we go. So the purpose of this whole process was to engage the community on key issues, to identify strengths, challenges, and shared goals. And then the report, which everyone is getting a sneak peek of tonight, since it's not published yet, but it will be published soon. The report can serve as a resource for Councilmember Cabán, for Community Board 1, city agencies, developers, residents, and it can strengthen ongoing community planning conversations. Next slide. So this is a quick look at the boundaries of the district. I think most people in the room are familiar. So this is the geographic area that helps frame the topics that we will discuss tonight. And then a little bit on process. So we wanted the process to be shaped by community input and grounded in data. Next slide. So we started with existing conditions research, followed by several rounds of engagement, which included focus groups, a survey, a kickoff meeting that was at PS 85 back in June, and open house workshops at various libraries throughout the district. And right now we are at the report back stage where we're sharing what we learned and we're sharing guidelines that the feedback has shaped. Next slide. Our engagement reached a pretty broad cross-section of the community. So we had 782 survey responses and pretty strong turnout at our events. And the feedback we received is what really forms the backbone of the guidelines that we'll be going over later tonight. Next slide. So the community planning guidelines report is structured into 3 main sections. There's the existing conditions section where we analyze demographics, housing, jobs, transportation, land use, and created kind of a snapshot in time of the current status across those topics. In community engagement findings, we synthesized all of the feedback we heard over the course of the 6-month process. And then lastly, in the community planning guidelines section, that outlines sort of the tools that we have to implement the principles that the community has and the desires that they expressed throughout the process. Next slide, please. So I'll start with an overview of what we found through our existing conditions analysis. which will include demographics and housing info based on data from the Census Bureau, as well as data from the Department of City Planning, Housing Preservation and Development, and will also cover jobs, transportation, and land use data as well. Okay, so starting with some population data, when we look at population trends in the district, there are some pretty clear shifts that we could see. So starting with the bar chart on the left, most of the recent population growth in the district was driven by households that tend to have higher incomes and higher education levels compared with New York City overall, as well as smaller household sizes. And then as we see in the chart on the top right, we also see that the district has a larger share of working age adults than the city as a whole. So for the district, over 50% of residents are between 20 and 44 years old, whereas for the city as a whole, it's about 39% are in that age group. And at the same time, there are fewer children and fewer seniors relative to citywide. And finally, the district remains very diverse. More than a third of residents were born outside of the United States. However, the share of first-generation residents has declined over the past decade, shifting from 44% down to 36%. Next slide. On the topic of the housing stock, so District 22 has 77,000 housing units, and most of those households, about 80%, are renters and 20% are homeowners. And just under half of all rental units are rent stabilized. When we say rent stabilized, though that's a type of rent regulated housing. It's most common in New York City for buildings that were built between 1947 and 1974, and they have 6 or more residential units. So for rent stabilized units, they have protections that include limits on how much rent can increase annually, which are set by the Rent Guidelines Board, right to a lease renewal, and eviction protections, which require legal cause from landlords. Much of the housing in the district is in small buildings that have less than 6 units, so most homes are not rent stabilized. And the district also has relatively few directly subsidized units, whether that's in NYCHA or other HPD or HUD programs like Mitchell-Lama or project-based Section 8. Next slide, please. So when we look at housing conditions in the district, there are a few key trends that stand out. Starting with the bar chart on the left, both median rents and home values in the district are not only higher than the citywide average, but they're also increasing at a faster rate. Whereas 10 to 15 years ago, during the 26 to 2010 period, incomes and education levels in this district were much more aligned with citywide rates. And then moving along to the bar chart on the right, with rents continuing to rise and very limited affordable options available, about 45% of households are now rent burdened, meaning that they spend more than a third of their income on housing. So taken together, these trends really show how difficult it has become to find stable and affordable housing in the district. Next slide. And now on the topic of jobs and transportation, there are almost 50,000 jobs located in the district. These jobs are heavily concentrated in public administration, construction, healthcare, and social assistance. In terms of how residents get to work, we see in this chart on the left that there is a slight majority that rely on public transit at 53% as their primary mode of commuting. About 21% drive to work if we add up driving alone and carpooling. And overall, just under half of households, around 46% of households, own at least one car. And then, not surprisingly, Midtown Manhattan is the top destination for District 22 commuters, given the relatively strong subway access that connects the district to the city's core job centers. And with that, I will turn it over to Brian to tell us about zoning, land use, and development in the district.
Thank you, Dana. Believe it or not, we can get even wonkier than that when we start talking about zoning. And just to prepare for that, it's helpful to revisit really quickly, for those who may not be super familiar, what is zoning all about? Zoning is the set of regulations that controls how properties can be used and developed. Basically, use, what can be in the building, homes, stores, industrial, and bulk, which is how large the building can be, how tall it can be, how far it has to be set back from the sidewalk, and things like that. And it sets these rules, and most of the time if somebody is developing a property, they are following the existing zoning rules, and that is called a New York City as of right development, which means they file the permits with DOB. DOB says, yes, this follows the current zoning, and they are allowed to build. There's no special permission by city planning or the city council. Next slide, please. So yeah, just to recap what zoning does: regulates the use and bulk of the building. It can also require affordable housing, which we'll just get into in a minute. And it can also have incentives for other certain uses that the community may want to see, like supermarkets or community facilities and things like that. Zoning rules alone do not force anybody to take action with their and develop. And people will only generally develop new buildings if the zoning aligns with the market. And where you have zoning that is out of date or a mismatch is where you start to see a lot of those applications come through public review, where somebody wants to build something different than zoning allows. Those individual site by site, block by block, with the developer applies for rezoning. Next slide, please. And one more point of explanation: if you're on the community board or have dealt with housing development in any form, you probably know this well, but for others, it's important to note affordable housing. The role of affordable housing: income, eligibility, and rents are set by AMI, area median income, which is calculated each year by HPD, with a methodology required by the federal government. And what is an affordable rent is pegged roughly to 30% of the household income. So you'll see on these charts, if you are a family of four making about 80,000, you're currently in the 50 AMI range, and you would be able to apply for a 2-bedroom apartment about $1,800 a month. And you may notice from these charts, once you get up 80 and 100, and certainly higher than that, it's really the incomes get pretty high and the rents get pretty high, pretty much close or even above when you get to the 120 and higher, what's market rate. So that's why when we talk about affordable housing and deeply affordable, we're really talking about 60 AMI and below at this point, based on the way these numbers have evolved. And especially the 30, 40, and 50 AMI categories here are deeply affordable, way below what you can find on the open market generally. Well, next slide, please. And there is a zoning tool called mandatory inclusionary housing that by which the city can require new development to include deeply affordable units, especially through these two options, option 1 and option 3, and which by which we can require 20 to 25% truly deeply affordable at the range of 40, 50, 60 AMI. As you saw with the chart on the prior slide, that is well below market. Next slide, please. Okay, zoning in the district. This is a simplified zoning map of the district. Shades of yellow are zoning that allows housing. The lighter colors are what city planners would call low density, allows only 5 stories or less. And the darker orange colors are where taller apartments are allowed. Usually in this district, that's like 8 to 14 stories. And the pink are where buildings with commercial are allowed. And purple, finally, are manufacturing zones where development is limited to commercial and industrial and housing is not allowed. So this is the basic zoning that has controlled what gets built in the district over the last 15 years. And we're gonna do a fun little quiz question here for a minute and wondering, asking you to guess over the last 15 years since 2010, how many new apartments do you think have been built in District 22? Well, take a minute to pop that question up. Okay, I think we can feel the answer. Let's see. Did it move to the response? I did not see what the distribution was. Anybody help me out?
Yes, Brian, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, so it looks like we have about a quarter of people who responded to the poll responded that approximately 1,000 new housing units were built since 2010. Some people, about a quarter of people said 2,000. A third of people who responded said 4,000. Only a handful of people responded 9,000. And similarly, only a handful of people responded 19,000.
Interesting. Okay, we can reveal.
Yes.
The answer is over 9,000 since 2010. So it's interesting that folks assumed it was lower than that. And you can see on this map where those have been built, and very much concentrated in the areas where the high density or the larger apartments are allowed, south of the Grand Central, west of Steinway, and north of Broadway. So that's actually a pretty large number of new housing over 15 years. Okay, next slide. And all right, we're gonna do one more of these quizzes. Bear with us. What out of those 9,000 plus units, what percent do you think were actually deeply affordable? Which means from those charts we saw 50 AMI or below, affordable for folks making 30 to 80,000 roughly. We'll give a couple seconds for these responses. Apologies, I'm getting like a frog in my throat as I talk. All right, give it a second to think about this one, and then I think we can pop the answer.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So the responses are 37% of people who responded to the poll said 3% are deeply affordable. 11 people said 6% are deeply affordable. 29% said that 14% of units are deeply affordable, and one person responded to the poll that 24% of units are deeply affordable.
Okay, and yes, the answer is only 3%. Only about a little less than 300 new units at 50 AMI or below over the last decade. And we'll get, when we get to recommendations, we'll explain more about why that's so low. But in an area that is built more than almost over 9,000 units. That's very low, and some neighborhoods where zoning is newer and has newer tools being applied, that number can get can be much higher, and we'll get to that in the latter section. Okay. And just real quickly, more about zoning, if you can bear it. Unlike most cities, New York City does not have a set timeline to update zoning, like every 10 years, for example. The last time the city completely rewrote zoning was over 60 years ago in 1961. And so all these areas in gray shade on the map have zoning that has not changed since 1961. There have been a couple of larger city-led, which means that where the Department of City Planning is the applicant rezonings, but not for a long time. And these were back in 1989 in West Astoria, also called Old Astoria, that darker orange area. And then 2010 was the bigger Astoria, which was rezoning, which was everything west of Steinway. But these rezonings were really focused on bulk height limits, putting height limits on, and they were not focused on affordable housing or bringing in new planning things like new parks and things like that. They were just more narrowly focused on heights. And since 2010, there have been a lot of these, I was talking about the private developer applications for one site or one block, and those are all these you see in the pink here, especially in Hallett's Point and Ravenswood area. And next slide, please. And just a really quick look at that Ravenswood area, which is south of Socrates Sculpture Park, close to the river near the Costco and Rainy Park. This area has, like, even by New York City standards, which I said New York City doesn't update its zoning very often, this is really old and strange zoning. And I'd say strange because it's mapped for 3 to 4 story housing, R5 zoning, but most of those blocks are actually industrial businesses. So it is a very strange mismatch. And that is why this area has seen 5 of these private developer rezonings, which are these red blocks, since 2018. But even more strangely, no development has actually happened yet on any of those blocks. So this is just a very odd situation over here where there hasn't been a holistic planning and community engagement about what this area actually, what should be allowed to be developed here, and what does it need alongside that development to actually be a whole holistic neighborhood. So this stood out to us when looking at zoning in the district. And now I'll turn it over to Sage to talk about input from the survey and community engagement.
Thank you, Brian. Just a quick little notes. If folks have any questions, you can please leave them in the Zoom chat. We'll be choosing some for the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Okay, so next we will provide an overview of the results from our community engagement, drawing on both the survey and the open house activities. These findings gave us invaluable insight into the priorities and concerns of D22 residents and directly shaped the community planning guidelines we'll share later in the presentation. So we'll jump in and I'll start with a brief overview and then highlight some of the key findings from the topic areas we focused on. So overall, survey respondents identified housing affordability, public safety, and sanitation as their top concerns in the district. This slide also highlights a small selection of the hundreds of comments we received, which helps illustrate why residents love their neighborhood for its community, diversity, and amenities, as well as the day-to-day challenges they experience. So as noted on the previous slide, housing affordability is a major concern for D22 residents. Feedback from both the survey and the open house highlighted the need for affordable rental housing and home ownership options. Residents identified several specific challenges as both renters and homeowners, including difficulty paying rent, utilities or property taxes, managing or receiving repairs and maintenance, and having too few bedrooms to meet their household needs. Continuing the topic of housing, we asked open house attendees where they would like to see new housing developments in the district. On this map, you can see the locations participants identified for potential high-rise housing. So you can see them along the East River near the Costco, along the major corridor of the 21st Street, and in areas close to transit, particularly along the 31st Street and in the southern corner of the district where the MR subway loops through. So regarding small businesses and economic development in D22, survey respondents noted challenges such as high turnover, unaffordable commercial rents, and difficulty accessing financing. The map on the right shows where open house attendees place stickers to indicate thriving and struggling businesses in their neighborhood. The thriving businesses, which are the green circles, cluster around the east-west corridors, such as Ditmars Boulevard, 31st Ave, and Broadway. The struggling businesses, the pink circles, appear along Astoria Boulevard, near Ravenswood houses, on the southern part of Steinway Street, and scattered throughout the district. Now we're going to talk about community services and amenities. We asked open house attendees whether they had to leave their neighborhood to access certain amenities. The chart on the left shows attendees most often, the chart on the left shows what amenities that people had to leave most often in their neighborhood. So this was performance or art spaces, grocery stores, recreation centers, or gyms. Furthermore, the most requested community facilities by open house attendees included recreation and community spaces, additional libraries, schools, and health centers. And as for businesses, grocery stores, more restaurants, a farmer's market were the top requests, which all relate to food access. So despite the prominent Astoria Park and the other smaller parks in D22, many residents report limited access to open space. As shown in the top chart on the slide, about half of survey respondents indicated that public spaces and parks are either inaccessible or inadequate. Open house participants were also asked how long it takes to reach their preferred park. The second chart on the slide shows how about half said it takes 10 minutes or less, roughly a quarter said 15, and another quarter reported 30 minutes or more. This feedback illustrates the wide spectrum of park access in the district. And then lastly, desired improvements for existing parks and open space in the district include additional restrooms, more trees, and a farmer's market. So residents provided extensive feedback about the conditions of the public realm, the sidewalks, streets, and plazas in the district, and how these conditions affect their day-to-day lives. The top concerns from the survey were pedestrian safety, unreliable subways, and parking challenges. Notably, we have heard a wide range of perspectives on bike lanes. Some community members support bike lanes and related safety measures, while others express frustration about how this infrastructure can affect driving and circulation. But speaking to the safety concerns, the map on this slide shows where open house attendees place stickers to indicate dangerous or challenging areas. So this includes intersections on Astoria Boulevard, particularly in the middle of the map at 31st Street, as well as along the entirety of 31st Street, 31st Ave, on Vernon Boulevard near the Sculpture Park, and on 21st Street and 31st Street. Lastly, residents also expressed a desire for more trash cans in public spaces, additional street trees, and safe bike lanes. So on the last slide of the community engagement section, I'll just highlight feedback on resiliency. Survey results show that transportation disruptions, damaged roads, sewage backups, and flooding affect over half of respondents after extreme weather events. Respondents additionally expressed interest in adding renewable energy, energy efficiency programs, and flood prevention measures in D22. So this concludes the community engagement findings, which did inform the development of community planning guidelines, which we'll discuss next.
Awesome. Thank you, Sage. Now I will go over the community planning guidelines, and this section includes both principles that we heard throughout the engagement process and available tools that can be used to implement those principles. Next slide. Create more affordable housing. So throughout the engagement process, people consistently told us that the lack of deeply affordable housing is their number one housing concern. Of course, people want more affordable housing, right? It sounds kind of obvious, but the existing tools that we have to make that happen are really not being used in this district. So looking ahead, what I mean by that is that we have three major levers to create more deeply affordable homes. So first, we can expand mandatory inclusionary housing, especially options 1 and 3, which Brian referenced earlier. Those are the options that require a meaningful share of deeply affordable units, the ones that target 50% of AMI and below. And we can expand MIH in areas where there have been several private applications approved by the community board. An example is in the Ravenswood area. Next slide. And second, we could also make much better use of our city-owned properties. For example, sites like municipal parking lots and local library branches. These are sites that could offer some real opportunity for 100% deeply affordable housing that's paired with community benefits, similar to successful projects elsewhere in the city, like in Inwood and in Sunset Park, where there were libraries that were redeveloped to have affordable housing on top. And an example of building affordable housing on city-owned sites is ICO Senior Living, which is pictured on the right. That's 180 units of 100% affordable senior housing, as well as retail and community facility space on 31st Street. And this was recently voted on by City Council, approved about a month ago. Next slide. And third, we know that nonprofit and mission-driven organizations are really key partners in creating and preserving affordability. So another priority is to strengthen outreach and support for those groups, helping them work with HPD, helping them navigate the development process, and ultimately build more homes that stay affordable over the long term. And an example of that is the Bishop A. Valero Senior Residence on 31st Road, and that includes over 100 units of affordable housing for low-income seniors and formerly homeless adults. HPD partnered with Catholic Charities for this development. Preservation of existing affordable housing. So we also heard throughout the engagement process from current residents of the district who love living in District 22, but they don't necessarily feel confident that their housing is going to continue to stay affordable enough to remain in the district. So shifting to preservation, protecting existing affordable homes is really just as important as building new ones. That means continuing and expanding partnerships with HPD, nonprofit housing organizations, and legal service providers to focus on tenants' rights, education, stronger housing code enforcement, and proactive outreach to building owners. A key goal is bringing more rent-stabilized properties into HPD preservation programs, which can lock in long-term affordability and improve living conditions. An example of that are the Marine Terrace apartments. And overall preservation is one of the strongest tools we have to keep people in their homes and make sure that existing affordable units remain affordable for the long run. And another strategy for preservation is to create opportunities for qualified community land trusts and nonprofit housing organizations to purchase distressed rent-stabilized buildings when they're offered for sale through legislation such as the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, just as an example. Next slide. So while the district has added thousands of new homes since 2010, this growth has not come with the infrastructure, parks, affordability, or the coordinated planning that we really need to support a balanced, holistic neighborhood. Developers are still bringing these site-by-site proposals, and that really limits our ability to shape the big picture. And neighborhood planning could give the community a chance to be more proactive in guiding the growth of the neighborhood and also securing public investments instead of just reacting to private applications. And this approach could be appropriate in areas that have outdated zoning and community interests, including Ravenswood and Old Astoria. The idea is really to plan for new housing and deeper affordability in a way that brings the infrastructure and the resources that neighborhoods need. Next slide. Another priority that was identified pretty consistently throughout the engagement process is improving the safety and sustainability of our streets and public spaces. Community members told us that streets need to be safer for pedestrians, cyclists, and for drivers. And that could be accomplished through coordination between DOT, Community Board 1, and other local partners on street improvement projects, better crossings, traffic calming measures, and more street trees and plantings. Public input, along with DOT crash data, highlighted several corridors and intersections that need attention. That includes specific stretches of Astoria Boulevard, 31st Avenue, Vernon Boulevard, and 21st Street. Cleanliness was also a common theme in the feedback that we received. And one strategy to address sanitation issues is to advocate for additional DSNY resources and stronger support for local nonprofit partners who help maintain the public realm. And finally, participants expressed strong interest in more public art. So building on existing efforts like the Welling Court mural project, there could be expanded opportunities for local artists to enhance the district with creative, community-driven work. Next slide. The next priority that was raised repeatedly throughout our public engagement process is expanding and improving parks and open space across the district. And we could see in this map on the right, so the green area are the areas where residents are within a 10-minute walk to a local park. And the gray area, which really covers a pretty large swath of the district, those are the areas where residents are not within walking distance to a park, meaning that it would take them more than 10 minutes to walk to a park. And we could see that that covers a pretty big area. And participants expressed a really strong desire for new investments to help existing parks better meet community needs. And that includes adding amenities that Sage mentioned earlier, like restrooms, supporting more programming like farmers markets, and improving the overall quality and maintenance of local parks. And residents also were urged for more opportunities for new parks, whether that's through the creative use of public land or potential acquisitions, especially in areas that are these gray areas on the map, outside of the current walk to park coverage. And a tool that we have available to implement those kinds of requests from the community is that we can advocate for the Parks Department to prioritize Queens Community Board 1 for a walk to park acquisition approval, similar to the recent approval that was in Community Board 3. And that would allow the Parks Department to identify and pre-approve potential sites, giving parks more flexibility to negotiate with property owners and secure new parkland where residents have said it's most needed. The goal is to make sure that every resident has access to a high quality open space within walking distance. Next slide. So this recommendation stems directly from community feedback calling for stronger green infrastructure and better flood resilience, especially in areas like Ravenswood and Hallett's Point that face the greatest stormwater challenges. More investments in tools like rain gardens, infiltration basins, and permeable pavement can strengthen long-term flood resilience. Another tool that's available is to require new developments in vulnerable areas to go beyond minimum standards by incorporating more street trees, permeable surfaces, and green roofs. And based on this input, another potential strategy is to require that all new developments meet or exceed Local Law 97 energy standards and eliminate fossil fuel use to support sustainability goals. Next slide. Public input showed us that small businesses face high turnover and difficulty accessing financing. One way to address this issue is to work with SBS and local partners like the Steinway Bid to stabilize businesses and reduce vacancies, especially along Astoria Boulevard, west of 31st Street, and Steinway Street, south of the Grand Central Parkway. Another tool that's available is to expand small business financing and lease assistance programs and to encourage developers to design new retail spaces to accommodate small businesses with minimal upfront costs in order to keep commercial corridors active and vibrant. The community also expressed strong support for good jobs and green infrastructure, specifically in industrial areas. Industrial jobs provide middle-class wages and opportunities for recent immigrants, which helps promote equity and economic opportunity. Some strategies that respond to this feedback are to encourage industrial businesses that create local jobs and support businesses that want to stay in the district through updated incentive programs, to invest in infrastructure like roads, to support workers and businesses getting to work, to implement green infrastructure like permeable pavement, rain gardens, and upgrading sewer and stormwater systems to reduce flood risk, and supporting the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, including sites like the Astoria Generating Station. And finally, community feedback highlighted gaps in supermarkets, healthcare clinics, recreation centers, and art spaces. Some strategies to address those issues are to encourage new community and recreation centers, childcare and primary healthcare clinics in mixed-use developments, promote grocery stores through programs like Fresh, farmers markets, or city-owned stores, and to expand public health facilities like city-run Gotham Health Centers. And then another strategy is to consider zoning and incentives for developers to include art studios or creative spaces, similar to an approach that's been used before in Gowanus. The goal is to give residents better access to essential services, fresh food, recreation, and arts opportunities. And with that, I will turn it back over to Councilmember Cabán for more on next steps in this process.
Awesome, thank you. So next steps, we're going to finalize the report. We're putting the finishing touches on the report, which will be out in the coming weeks. And then once that's released, it's going to give us a clear framework for how we approach and guide future community planning and development in the district. And the report's also going to include detailed documentation of the survey results and the open house activities for all who participated to dig in, take an even deeper dive than what you saw here this evening. So that's on the report side. And then we can go to the next slide. And we'll be using these new guidelines to the best of our ability. Going forward, we want to use the report's guidelines to help evaluate every new project proposal that comes across the district. And I'm talking about residential projects, the arts, community centers, city agency initiatives. For example, the Walk to Park initiative that was mentioned before, that the Parks Department has been rolling out in different neighborhoods to expedite the department's process for building new neighborhood parks in areas outside of a 10-minute walk to a park. So you saw that map with all of that gray space, and we've actually already started to identify some possible lots that could help be turned into smaller parks in the East Elmhurst part of the district, for example. And we want to work with the new administration to prioritize development of 100% deeply affordable housing on city-owned lots. So I was really, really proud of not only putting in some of our discretionary funding, but working with the developers and the city on that ICO senior project, because something that we heard time and time again was just how hard it was for older adults who were on really fixed incomes to be able to afford to stay in the community while also having lots of the amenities and services that are nice to have when you're aging in place. And so we want to be able to do more things like that. We can move to the next slide. So the community planning opportunities, there are lots of opportunities. And based on the report's findings, we plan to explore more comprehensive neighborhood planning possibilities with the Department of City Planning. So that's like a big piece of why we did this. We want to be able to have this report to then engage with the Department of City Planning on something that is more comprehensive. So as the presentation showed, certain areas of the district have experienced a lot of these private one-off rezonings where developers bring forward a single site for construction without any coordinated planning or investment from the city to support the goals that we heard from you all throughout this process. The things like deeply affordable housing, new and improved parks, safer and cleaner streets, those new facilities like, recreation centers, affordable supermarkets, and community-led planning can offer a better way for the parts of our districts to grow with a community vision and supporting public investments. And we plan to bring constituents along in this process, and we're focused on setting up a collaborative process for any future district-wide or neighborhood-wide planning opportunities. And we want to ensure that all of our neighbors are at the table as we build out this people-focused plan for the entirety of District 22. We've been able through this process to really identify those priority areas for growth and density. And you saw that in some of the slides, but you'll see it in more depth in the report once it's released, and that'll guide the work and help shape long-term district planning in the years ahead. So I'm really grateful for all of the information that you all have provided and that you'll continue to provide, so that we're using this as our North Star when it comes to how our community grows and continues to be a place that we all want to call home.
Great. Thank you, council member. I want to make sure, that was a lot of information to digest. So I want to give people a couple of minutes. Again, I just want to clarify, we're going to do a Q&A, but the questions are going to have to come through the chat. So I want to give people a few minutes, and so we'll just take a little break. You can ponder what we just discussed, and please put any questions that you have in the chat.
Yeah, while you're thinking about your questions, I think, one question that I did see in the chat that Brian answered, but I think it's worth sharing with all of you, is Richard Kuzami of the Old Astoria of Owana. He asked if we have surveyed the owners of the rezoned lots that have not gone ahead with construction and wants to know what's causing those great delays. And when I think of that question, I think about that area by Socrates and Costco, where they were originally zoned as these like manufacturing lots, and they were rezoned to allow for housing units to be developed, but that hasn't really happened. And so, like Brian said, that's part of the process that we want to pursue, right? Reaching out to some of those owners and saying, hey, what's going on? What are your plans for this site? And then with a comprehensive neighborhood planning, document taken to the city's planning commission, we can have conversations around what incentives can be provided to make some of those changes happen.
Okay, So we're getting some questions in the chat. Please keep popping them in. Again, we're very preliminary stages with all of this planning, but I do want to just put out some of the general questions. So council member, so in terms of high-rise luxury development, how are we really going to be like what are some of the tools that we use to fight against that in terms of being able to have more affordable units? So do you want to reiterate some of the goals that you discussed?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Is it a question around height or
It's a
what?
question around preventing purely luxury, affordable
Yes.
luxury
Yes.
housing in the district and how we can prevent that.
Yeah, and I saw another question in there, and the land use team, please feel free to hop in. Also about the limitations of MIH. And when I first got into office, one of the first things that was put in front of me was the Hallett's North rezoning. That was a really difficult test for me early on when I didn't know much about specifically zoning and development, and the folks on this call and other folks in the land use division were really patient with me as I went back to them 2, 3, 4 times and said, hey, let's talk about this again. I want to really make sure I understand it because, I come from a legal I was doing public defense work. I was doing public health and safety policy, and certainly land use zoning and development was not my area of expertise. So there was quite the learning curve there. But what became very, very clear is that MIH is a really limited option that is nowhere near perfect and cannot be the only strategy that we use to solve the housing crisis that we're experiencing. And that's why with that rezoning, we ended up putting out at the same time a 10-point plan around maintaining and growing the ability to access affordable housing, and it included things like bills that my colleagues in the city council were sponsors of. In fact, one of them I'm really hoping gets to pass next week. That's the COPA bill that was mentioned before, the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, which really gets our community land trusts and nonprofit developer partners involved in creating not just deeply affordable housing, but also housing that has the ability to be sort of democratically controlled, and really tenants will really have the power to have some agency in those spaces. You can't separate housing from sort of the cost of living and the wage crisis and saying, hey, we've got to do what we can to be able to raise wages to support union drives, all of those kinds of things, because raising incomes is also important in being able to afford your housing that you're experiencing. Making sure, like was talked about before, that we're investing in programs, whether it's things like neighborhood pillars, whether it's things like the city FEPS program, where we're creating more affordability through tenant subsidies or these other kinds of programs that make our living situation more affordable. And then we talked about that piece about the ability to build on public land. The challenge with that is that there's so little public land left, especially in our district, but there are some zones of opportunities. We have some municipal lots and some other options. We've been exploring kind of the area that's sort of close to the Rikers Island Bridge and seeing what might be possible there. So to that point, I think it's really important that we do those things. And there was even, as part of the survey responses, asking people about their desire for supportive housing and things like that, because the need for housing, actually, that conversation doesn't stop at just affordability, but really the understanding that not everybody's housing needs are the same. And so there are folks who might live with certain disabilities or a mental health diagnosis or whatever it might be, that really need the support of sort of holistic supportive housing. And we have really great models and do that in lots of different places, and being able to expand that to make sure that we're taking care of all of our neighbors with whatever their needs might be. And then the other thing too is that, at least one thing that I have learned is it's as long as we're doing it in the right way and thinking about what's needed to support it, density is or height doesn't have to be a bad thing. You know, we navigate our streets, certainly not looking up in the air, but really it's about the streetscape. Really, it's about understanding which corridors can really support a little bit more density and create some of that relief. And that's what neighbors were able to do when they were marking up the masks, the maps that you saw earlier. So it's really a like a yes and approach.
Thank you, council member. I know that the council was just talking about some of the limits of MIH and how it's not, you know, satisfactory in many instances. So I was wondering, there was a question just about clarifying again what MIH is. So if I could just maybe turn that back over to Brian for a second and sort of explain maybe why the council member was saying the limitations exist based on what it is.
We could roll back to that slide in the deck if possible, but yeah, and I wanted to make clear that like all that development that's been happening in that area, especially north on Vernon Boulevard, a little bit north of Socrates Sculpture Park, it does not have MIH. It's like purely luxury, and that is a big difference versus 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 of the units in the building actually being affordable. And so there's a lot of zoning in the area already that allows basically 100% luxury. And this is not, and the other thing that keeps happening is the 1 by 1, block by block applications where all you get is the MIH if the thing gets built at all. Why we are raising the idea of a neighborhood plan as an idea to keep talking about is that it allows bringing in a lot of public investment alongside that in 100% affordable buildings on public land. In, for example, the Gowanus neighborhood plan, then council member Lander was able to secure over $200 million for NYCHA renovations as part of that planning package. Those are the kind of things that become part of the conversation when it's a conversation about public community-led planning, rather than just letting developers continue to go and file with what they already have or come through the process 1 by 1, proposing a building that is only 20 or 25% affordable.
Thank you, Brian.
And I was just going to chime in there. I saw multiple questions also around sort of how our small businesses are struggling, our mom and pop. One of the things I love about this neighborhood is just the incredible small businesses that we have. I try to spend every dollar I earn in the neighborhood, knowing that it helps our local economy. And we actually, in addition to this survey, aside from it, we have been over the past few years doing a lot of small business surveying. At this point, we have had hundreds of conversations with small business owners and even done follow-up conversations with some of those same owners to figure out sort of what it is that the biggest challenges are. And the two biggest ones right now are absolutely rent. The rent is really high, and also federal policies around tariffs, right? You have these small businesses that are trying to create these really well curated markets that really speak to the things that neighbors in the neighborhood are looking for, desiring, or and that's become really, really difficult. So in the same way that we have residential rent stabilization, one of the things that we've been trying to explore on the council side, again, outside of this neighborhood planning, but is a commercial rent stabilization bill to help take some of that burden off. Just like tenants are saying the rent's too damn high, that's really the case for a lot of our small businesses, and it's really hurting them pretty badly. When their leases are up, They're skyrocket. Sometimes they're going up 50%, 100%, 200%, and then having trouble getting landlords to allow them to sign longer leases for a certain amount of stability, things like that. So in addition to some of these things, just outside of the space, know that we are looking at ways that we can really continue to support our small business community.
I could just say, in relation to this question about vacancies in new buildings, but sometimes that ground floor is left blank. This is like a complicated problem that the city could really do more to try to solve. From what I know about it, sometimes it's the cost. It's the upfront cost of building out, like the developer just builds like an empty shell in that ground floor. So it costs a lot of money, and the developer often doesn't want to pay for the the cost of building out the actual store or restaurant in that space. And then it's like, will you, small business that's trying to start, have $50,000 or $100,000 to build this? No, that makes it much more difficult. So that's part of the problem. Some of these developers just aren't that experienced with getting those like commercial spaces up and running, and don't know what's involved, and it's complicated. And lost my train of thought. Part of the problem also is a financing thing, where sometimes it's a little complicated, but sometimes like basically the lender, the bank, is like demanding on their books a higher rent than that can actually be got for the space, and so it actually then becomes an incentive for them to keep it vacant rather than get a lower tenant, which sounds a little weird, but sometimes that's a problem. And some cities are doing things like vacancy. There's sticks and carrots basically in regards to that issue. There's incentives, there's support, and there's also some cities do things like vacancy taxes, trying to use more of a stick to incentivize people to finally get a tenant in a storefront. But that's a complicated issue, and you can have an hour conversation just on that one. And that's the kind of conversations that you have when you do community planning now. You have the working group that's just economic development. That is, if this is your issue, you can come to a meeting and talk about it for an hour with the SBS experts and whatnot. Yeah.
Okay, I see just one more question. I'm just gonna end. It's a pretty specific question for the land use team, and we're talking about building on top of libraries. Is there a particular library in mind, or is it just a general idea?
Is it a question for us?
Yes.
Okay. Library, so this is something that like the libraries and the city and HB are interested in generally across the city. And it's been done successfully in a handful of spots already, like Inwood and Sunset Park and Brooklyn Heights. It depends, it all depends. It's probably most appropriate where you have a library that is we may be really small or needs tens of a total new roof, or total, like the library's kind of needs a lot of work and is no longer serving the community well. And then also these can be redeveloped with a new, larger, like brand new library at the bottom and affordable housing above. So it can be a win-win. If it's like a library that's one of those historic, like Andrew Carnegie funded libraries some neighborhoods have, that's probably not where they're going to do this. But or a library that's just gotten a $30 million renovation, they're not going to like those. So those are the kind of things you think about which libraries are appropriate or not.
Okay. I don't see any more questions. So I'm happy to continue this conversation. Dana, do you want to go to the last slide? So just so people know, you're gonna be sent after this a feedback form. So this feedback form will also have an open-ended response section where you can put more questions and we can get back to you by email. or you can call us. And I also just wanted to reiterate that the report will be coming in the next couple of weeks, which is so exciting. So it's going to be available on the council's land use website, but also we will be, advertising it on all of our social media and sending out a newsletter with uh, with all the information about how to access it. And yeah, so we're really excited. This was a great little preview tonight, and you'll be seeing a much more extensive version of what we discussed. So excited for that. And we can end a little early. I can give you a little bit of your time back this evening. So unless anyone else has anything else to add. Good. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you
everybody. Hope you
so
have a
much
really
for
nice
joining.
evening. By